as soon as I could move my fingers enough, when they weren't shaky from the medication, I like Googled like, how do you find Amy? So, for months I was in the hospital. I honestly, they're actually pretty good memories because I have 3 brothers and great parents, and they actually just kind of camped out with us in the ICU. I mean, I was 18, I had my whole family there in the pediatric ICU with me, and we went for wheelchair rides, and we kind of just made the best of it. So it's one thing like not being able to eat and drink like when you're in the hospital and you're in your nest and you're like sick, like okay. But then when I was like medically stable, the doctors just discharged me months later, and I was technically healthy. Like I didn't have like a diagnosis or an illness. I was just kind of like this thing without a stomach. So I was on IVs for intravenous nutrition, but they're like, go free in the real world, and like you can't even have an ice cube, and we don't know when that will happen. So I guess I didn't know really how to act like a victim or a patient because I'd never been sick before. So I remember like I would get like really upset and depressed for like a minute, but then I would get really anxious because I felt like I wasn't getting anything done. And I think the biggest fear in my head waking up from a coma was like, oh my God, like I'm not going to be relevant anymore. I think because I was always so driven as a performer, that was how I connected. I'm like, I have to make my mark on the world. And I think my biggest fear was like, I'm gonna be a has-been at 18. So I think that kind of filled me with this manic drive to just, I went from being the sickest kid in the ICU to the patient that they had to chase around the unit because I was always like doing laps with my dad. So anyway, I was discharged, and I had always had this fantasy that the day I was finally discharged from the ICU, I'd be all dressed up and have no medical bags attached to me. I'd skip out the door and grab a burger on my way out and waltz back into my old life. Except the day I was finally let out of the hospital, my IV pole was kind of my dance partner, and burgers don't go down so well without a digestive system. So on top of that, the day we moved out of the hospital, my parents moved us into a brand new house because they felt like we needed a new beginning. Buying a house, did it help me or them? Who was I now, and what was this body covered in adhesive, plugged into machines and leaking out of openings that I didn't even know I had? The only good part about an empty house was an empty fridge. Thank God there was no food in the house. Until a family friend came over and brought us a dozen bagels, some whitefish salad, and a schmear. And I just remember standing over the counter, picking the poppy seeds off of a bagel, carving out its doughy insides, and making that crust feel as hollow as I felt inside. And after I mutilated this poor mound of dough, this evil thing that threatened to kill me if I even attempted to eat it, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was hungry for a purpose and food. I wanted spiritual fulfillment and to find God again, but I'd give him up in a heartbeat for a hunk of steak. Instead, I had what my dad called my nightly pina colada cocktail.